tore my cruciate on 7 days' notice. Some guy stepped in for me, cut weight so badly that he ended up in hospital on the day of the fight. I was like, oh my God, there's got to be a proper way of doing this. I used to get a rotisserie chicken in the morning at Tesco and just eat that in fight week, and that was it. My kidneys were crippled all the time. I'm used to people cutting from like 87 kilos down to 70 and us considering that normal. Really, from the outside, it's not normal, it's mental. There's been scenarios, and I'm not proud to say this, but this is how extreme it can get, where the people have collapsed and passed out in the baths.
Yes. Do you reckon Tom Aspinall against Jon Jones?
My honest opinion,
Hello and welcome back to the Puncher's Chance podcast. In today's episode, we're joined by a very special guest, so hit the subscribe button for every podcast every week on YouTube, Spotify, all that good stuff. Today we are joined by Dr Sean Aspinal, combat sports nutritionist. You've worked with fighters in the UFC, boxer, Matchroom. Tell us, from your point of view, what do you do? What is your job, and who are the sort of people you've worked with?
First off, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. Generally, the role of a nutritionist is pretty simple. You'll know the combat sports space is people have to make weight, so that's always going to be a proverbial problem. And for a lot of people, it can be just that. It can be a problem. And my goal is to show people the right way to do it. Now, everybody's got a different perspective on what that correct way is. My goal is to get you as safely into that ring as possible for you to then be able to go and put on, showcase your true potential, if that makes sense. Because a lot of people can make weight, but if you're not doing it correctly, then realistically, are you in the best shape in the ring? And I think for me, putting you in that position is the number one. So it's a weird one how to define the role, really, because in one essence it is planning food. In one essence, it can be kind of that emotional support coach as well. And then the last little bit is the bit that they don't like, and the bit where I knock on the door the day before the weigh-in and we go, right, it's time to get in the bath, and I'm that guy that they hate. Do you know what I mean? So it encompasses a lot of different things. And it encompasses a lot of different things for a lot of different people. So, for example, like you said, I work with a lot of people in the UFC, but most of them are heavyweights. They don't necessarily have the problem of making weight, or if they do, it's not a big problem. So the role for them is completely different for the role of somebody who's got to cut 10, 15 kilos. So wide role, but as a summary, I'm here to get you in the best shape possible, the safest way possible, so that you can be the best version possible of yourself.
Yeah, and on that, you sort of say, obviously, everyone's got their own sort of way of doing it, or what they believe is right. And yourself, you've got a bachelor's, master's, PhD in sort of the industry. So with that, when you were working towards those, was this the goal? Was it to sort of do this thing, or is it something that maybe you fell into a little bit? How did that come about?
So my background is me and I hate dropping names, but this is how it all started anyway. So my cousin's Tom Aspinall, who's UFC heavyweight champ at the moment.
That was one of my questions. Oh, I wanted to make sure you were actually related.
Yeah. So me and him I'm his technically older cousin. We were born the same year, so we've grown up together. And his dad Andrew got Tom into combat sports, and getting Tom into combat sports, he got me into combat sports. So we both get into kickboxing at an early age. So I've been involved in combat sports since I was about 6 or 7. I had a decent stint in amateurs as a kid, doing tons of kickboxing fights, with the goal of eventually fighting. And when I got to 19, tore my cruciate in my knee. So I had a fight, won, was fighting again 2 weeks later, tore my cruciate in training. And then for me, somebody stepped in. So this was at the time I was doing my sports science undergrad. I had no idea what I wanted to do. Just went to uni because my mum told me to, and was like, oh, well, what do I like? I'll go do sport. So went into doing sports science, was the worst uni student ever because I spent most of my time just training. So barely turned up to uni. Supposed to fight, tore my cruciate, and the guy who stepped in for me, so I tore my cruciate on 7 days notice. So some guy stepped in for me, cut weight so badly that he ended up in hospital on the day of the fight. And I was like, oh my God, this there's got to be a proper way of doing this. But at the time, this was 2013. There was no science around this. This was still brand new, pretty much. My looking back on it, my diet to cut weight, and I tell this story all the time because this is how it still is now to some extent. You get your information from your coach because that's the way that they've done it, and you just end up in a mad place. So my diet used to be, I used to work at Tesco at the time, and I used to get a rotisserie chicken in the morning at Tesco and just eat that in fight week, and that was it. And I used to waterload with 10 litres of water a day. Now, I'm not the biggest bloke, I don't need 10 litres of water. And my kidneys were crippled all the time, and I was like, this is fighting, this is how it is, you just got to do it. So that was my experience of weight cutting. Then this guy missed weight and ended up in hospital, and I was like, there has to be a proper way of doing this. And I went to Liverpool John Moores, which right now is like one of the leading spaces in combat sports research, and at the time was one of the leading sports science unis in the world. And they started a master's in nutrition. I was like, you know what, let's just do this and see what happens. I wanted to work in football originally. Did the master's, finished it. The jobs in sports nutrition aren't necessarily like plentiful. Went to uni to do a PhD, and then ended up just falling back into it. Once people knew that I had experience in nutrition and weight cutting, it just all came full circle. And it all came full circle, bizarrely, at the time that Tom got in the UFC. So I went to watch his last fight on Cage Warriors. If you've seen it, it was a viral fight because he checks a leg kick and the guy snaps his shin bone around his leg kick. So we watched that fight, and Tom was about to quit MMA at that point. And then as he got to the UFC, I'd gone full time on nutrition, and then everything just matched up, and it was almost like a match made in heaven at the time. And then everything just ran. So there was it wasn't a goal to get into it, but it just kind of worked out that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's weird now, you're sort of like even just telling our story, but
Yeah.
how things sort of just fall into place.
That's it. None of it was, that's what I mean, none of it was forced. I never seeked this out, but looking back on it, it all kind of just made sense. Do you know what I mean? I'd been in this, because I was speaking to somebody else about this, and one of the criticisms at university from my kind of lecturer was, there's a lot of people in this space who are very good research-wise, but aren't very good as a practitioner. Like, you can know the science, but you can just be a massive nerd. But if you can't translate that to the area of sport you're in, and you guys will know, fighters are a very specific breed of people, so you have to have a personality to be able to kind of manage fighters to some extent, or at least resonate with them. So it's just bizarre that I'd been in fighting, I'd gone and nerded out, and I'd come back and it had blended together. Because maybe without both of those, it might not have worked. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, a very nice accident to happen almost.
Yeah, it's good that, and it's interesting you speak about obviously the sort of MMA stuff, and to my understanding, obviously, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that the weight cuts are different and perhaps more extreme in certain combat sports than others.
Yeah.
Boxing likes to, I think, pride itself on being a little bit more regulated, even though I'm sure it's not. You know, how does that look? You know, if you're talking to an MMA fighter about how he makes weight and a boxer, how does that differentiate?
So it's funny because I'd say, I wouldn't say I've only just recently got into boxing, but like my instance in working with people in boxing and things like that has only come in, like, say, the last 12 to 15 months, whereas MMA for me and Muay Thai has been my bread and butter since the beginning. So I'm used to coming to weigh-ins and seeing people, black rings around their eyes, completely drawn faces, looking like they're on death's door, to be honest. Like, there's no way these guys can fight the next day, do you know what I mean? And then I've been starting going to these boxing events, and I've had a lot of boxers come to me and go, oh, I've got this big weight cut to do. And I'm like, right, sound easy, because I'm used to big weight cuts. Like, I'm used to people cutting from like 87 kilos down to 70 and us considering that normal. So that's like a 17 kilo swing, and we're like, really, from the outside, it's not normal, it's mental, do you know what I mean? But then I come to box and they go, I've got 6 kilos to lose, I'm a little bit worried, and I'm like, oh, easy, okay, right, we'll nail this. Like, for example, I went to the Callum Simpson card in Sheffield, and it's a breath of fresh air to see people stood weighing in and not looking like they're on death's door. And I'm like, you know what? This is probably the way it should be. Do you know what I mean? Like this is the way it should be. And like, boxing can, I think, pride itself on the weight cuts not being mental. Don't get me wrong, it can't be, because in boxing you get a lot more head blows than you do in MMA. But you're right. The weight cuts in MMA are far more severe. Like, if you have a look at, there was recently UFC 311, where they had Makhachev and Moicano and everybody else, and the California State Athletic Commission releases the weight cuts, and releases like how big they get the day later. And some of these guys are putting on nearly 20% body weight in 24 hours. So like, for example, Islam weighed in at 154 and fought at 178, I think, which isn't massive, but it's still huge compared to boxing. Whereas in boxing, these guys are maybe putting on, I don't know, 5 or 6 kilos, whereas these guys in MMA can put on 10 plus kilos in 24 hours.
Yeah, it's interesting because in boxing, if you're that kind of guy that does those extreme weight cuts, you're called like a weight bully. It's like a bad thing. You're kind of, and if anything, it's a skill in its own right, being able to do that and still have the strength and the speed and everything you need, and the mental strength and speed in the ring. So is there, I presume there is in your mind, certainly there's a sort of sweet point where you are as heavy as you can be without being, a complete sort of tired, hungry mess.
See, the weight bully thing for me is an interesting one, because we get this a lot in MMA and we get it a lot in Muay Thai as well. I don't know if I resonate with the statement of weight bully, only because, like you said it yourself, to be a weight bully is a skill. And whilst you do get the advantages in the ring of being slightly bigger, and I say slightly bigger because these guys are blowing up quite big, and when you get in there, like, the difference of 1 to 2 kilos probably isn't enormous. But the weight bully thing is an absolute skill, because when you consider weight cutting from a base level, you've got to consider everything from like genetics all the way up to starting body fat percentage. And in my head, if you can do it and you can do it safely, people are going to do it. Combat sports athletes will find a loophole in everything to be able to get the most out of themselves in the most legal way possible 99% of the time. So if you can be a proverbial weight bully and you get benefit from it, then I'd argue, as long as it's safe to do so and you're not killing yourself to make the weight, then kind of why not? Do you know what I mean? Like, look at Alex Pereira, for example, in the UFC. He was a weight bully until he physically couldn't do it anymore, but he reaped the rewards from it. And I see a lot in Muay Thai as well, in that there's a lot of guys who are considered this weight bully but make it really safely. And those who make it really safely are generally under the, like, advice of a professional. And if you are going to do these mad weight cuts, I'd always say you have to get somebody involved, because there are a lot of downsides to it. Like, for example, recently, I've had a guy come to me. I'm not going to name names, obviously, but I've had a guy come to me because he's done so many weight cuts in such a short period of time that he's now presenting with acute kidney damage and like kidney filtration issues. This guy's like 25, and like, the money in MMA and Muay Thai and even boxing to an extent, until you make it,
it's not great.
No, and a lot of these guys see professional boxer and go, "Oh, this guy's a millionaire." Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, nah, this guy might earn 15k a fight, and he might only fight once a year.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you know what I mean? So the dangers of weight cutting are very real, and it's very much like anything. If you're going to push it to an extreme, you've got to expect some kickback somewhere, and having a professional on board does make the whole process easier and safer. But again, we go back to the beginning of what my job is. It's part of my job is to tell you cannot make this weight division anymore, or you can make this weight division, but we need to do X, Y, and Z, and you need to be happy with what that is. So the weight bully thing's certainly a little bit more prevalent in MMA and Muay Thai than boxing. Again, probably for a good thing. But again, if you can make the weight safely, then why not?
Yeah, that was something I was going to ask, in terms of, like, if a new fighter come to you, would you sort of take time to look at them and tell them, right, this is your best fighting weight, or is there a case of them coming to you and say, this is the weight I need to hit, what do I need to do to get there?
So it depends on context. So if for example, let's say I've got a professional boxer who's trying to drop a weight category because he's just lost a fight, for example, and he knows he probably is going to be most competitive at that weight class below, but he doesn't know if he can get there, then that's a very different scenario than if I've got, I don't know, like a 3-0 amateur MMA guy who just wants to be the biggest he can for a weight category. So if you are, my advice to everybody is this, is if you're newer to the space, or you're still not at that professional level yet, you're going to get way more benefit from just fighting regularly. And fighting regularly means less weight cuts. And you're going to be so much healthier, you're going to have so much more fight experience getting into that possibly professional level than you would if you're taking 2 fights a year because you're cutting 15, 16 kilos every camp and killing yourself doing it. the best thing you can do if you've got the money to be able to do it is, or really this is how everybody should do it if you're serious about your sport, is we get a body fat assessment, we see what weight you can actually make, because from a body fat assessment we can see how much muscle mass you've got. How much muscle mass will dictate how much you can lose in competition week. It also dictates things like how much weight can we actually diet to, because for males and females both in the same right, although the numbers are different, you have an essential level of fat mass that you need to be able to function. Like, you can't be super shredded 24/7 because bodily functions just stop working. Like, we need fats to like maintain cell structure, maintain your ability to like absorb vitamins, and like sex hormones are dictated heavily by fat content. So if you're seeing these guys who are walking around shredded 24/7, probably not in the healthiest place. So we need to decide, have you actually got the body fat to lose to go down? And if you don't have the body fat to lose to go down, we either need to stay where we are, or we need to start looking at taking off muscle mass. And that's not a conversation most people want to have, the muscle mass one, because fighters will go, oh, I've got less muscle mass, I'm going to be less powerful, I'm going to be weak. But if you want to make that lower weight class, sometimes that has to be done. And doing that in the safest manner then brings up a whole new way of dieting as well.
Yeah, how difficult are those sort of last minute, so to speak, weight cuts? Because obviously I see you worked with Reece recently, didn't you? And he obviously had that fight on very late notice. And I've spoken to a couple guys, and there's a girl we know, Elizabeth Ashoba, Nigerian girl. She dropped a stone in 7 days notice for a fight, which to my mind just sounds like obscene, like not a chance. How difficult is that? And obviously there's no magic number, but what sort of area is even possible to do that with?
So, you know what? The Reece story was really funny because we were prepping for a fight on the Callum Simpson card in January anyway, but we weren't necessarily in a place where we were particularly cutting a ton of weight. We were just kind of floating through and slowly chipping away at stuff. Don't get me wrong, Reece was in a really nice position to do it, but any fighter will tell you if that kind of opportunity comes up, they're going to do it anyway. Now, I had this conversation with Reece, and Reece will be happy me telling this story, is say 12, 16 months ago, I would say that Reece wasn't living the athlete lifestyle, let's say. He used to get quite heavy out of camps. And all of a sudden, like in the last 12 to 14 months, there was just a flick of a switch and he became this unbelievable professional. Every box was ticked. He was on some form of diet, not necessarily losing weight, but just maintaining a healthy weight all year round. Like, his relationship with food was really good. And we sat down after that fight and he said to me, he said, if that was me 16 months ago, I couldn't have taken that opportunity because I would have been well too heavy to be able to do it. So again, if you would, like, back to your question, like, what does it take? If we'd have had Reece 16 months ago for that fight, we'd have had to lose maybe 10 kilos in fight week. And that's not a position I could have said yes to, because as good as the money was, as good as the opportunity was, that's not a safe area for him to lose. That's like 15% above fight weight. And I'm, as a professional, I'm not willing to do that to him. Because don't get me wrong, he could have got in there. Oh my God, he would have been that guy who I said looks like death's door when he does it. And he's probably getting sparked out inside one, and his career trajectory completely changes. Like, there's probably a safe area, whereas if I can get you to like 10% above competition weight, which sounds like a lot, but when you break it down, it's not necessarily enormous. If I can get you to 10% before competition weight, you can probably take a short notice fight. So if you're 70 kilos, 77 kilos. If you're 60 kilos, 66, for example. Because there's so many different compartments of the body that we can pull from, that I can probably get you close. And sometimes it might not be the best thing, but if there's a Riyadh season card on the line, or for example, I've got a guy at the moment, I'm not going to name names because nothing's been 100% confirmed yet, from Wales. We're waiting for a UFC call-up. We don't know when that's coming. We're waiting for an injury pull-out. So we've said, we need you in that bracket. So him now, we've got him to about 10%, 11% walking around weight. For him to go, we need you on 5 days, because we can do it then. Would I recommend that for an amateur fighter? Absolutely not. But where there is opportunity and money on the line, if we can get you to about 10% on a short notice, I can probably get you there. Is it dangerous? Now, with the Reece one, it was an interesting one because it was so easy. People were like, oh my God, he must need to kill himself. And like, to disclose numbers, like, we ended up dehydrating Reese about 1.5 kilos the night before, which is nothing. Like, Reese can lose about 1 kilo in a normal training session from sweat anyway. So when we broke down the numbers, for Reese, it was super safe to do, because he rang me on the Monday, and you've seen Reese's new teeth, haven't you, as well? So he rings me at like midnight. He's gone to his car, he's put his light on, and I've just got this beaming smile on FaceTime. He goes, "We're going to Saudi." And I'm like, "All right." He says, "I've had a meal deal this morning. Do you think I can make weight?" And I'm like, "I reckon you'll probably be all right, you know."
Do you not have to ask what the meal deal was?
So his meal deal choice is, he has a white monster, he has a tomato and basil pasta, and now he was quite proud of this, but he'd bought some like McCoy's salt and vinegar crisps, and he was like, there was just something in the back of my mind that told me, don't have these crisps today. And I'm like, if you'd have had the crisps, you'd have probably been all right anyway. But he was dead proud that he'd not had the crisps. But yeah, for him, it was a case of, what do we need to do? What do we need to do right now? So we stayed up that night just planning. Like, for him, the week was pretty cruisy, because I say cruisy, it was a mental week, because we found out on the Monday, we were on a plane by the Tuesday, we were there by the Wednesday, and he was cutting weight on the Thursday, which is crazy. But for him, those kind of really, like where you were saying before, like 7 kilos is a lot to lose, and for a female, it probably is, but maybe not so much for a male. Once we kind of got in kind of low carbohydrate protocols, low fiber, low sodium, we pulled a little bit of food out. There was a little bit of compromise that it maybe had to be a little bit more aggressive on the food side than otherwise. But we got him to a place where dehydration was sensible, and it was a case of, all right, we can do this now. And I think you'll see when you see him step on the scale, he looked pretty fresh. Like, he looked really good. So I was really happy with where he was. I don't think the weight cut could have gone any better, really. But obviously the danger of that general fast turnaround, if you are going to do it, and this is what I say to everybody now, it opened my eyes as well to any opportunity can come at any point, and you as an athlete have to be ready to take them, because you can probably make the weight, but whether you perform or not, it's going to be the deciding factor as to where your career goes, because they're going to expect you to make weight if they call you up. So it's, are you in the best place possible all year round to be able to do so? And if you're not, then that's something that I would advocate heavily now, especially with Riyadh season, especially with the way the UFC are calling people up at the moment on last minute pullouts. You just got to be ready. You got to be 12-13% away from fight weight at any one time, and if you're not, somebody else is going to take your opportunity.
I'm sure it's difficult as well, obviously, when you get an opportunity like that. I'm sure if they are at the point where they're not going to make that weight, and you have to tell them, look, it's not possible to turn that money down. I'm sure there's some nutritionists as well, because they are going to get a cut of that money. I'm sure there's some that just go, right, we're just going to have to try and make it happen to get that money.
I think, you know what, I'm always going to try and be in a position where I'll go, I'm going to try my best to get you there. But if the numbers are completely mental, I can't say yeah. And I'm going to have to explain that to your coach as well. Like, and then it's for you to kind of go and reflect on where you are lifestyle-wise to go, can I turn this opportunity down again? Because sometimes you only get one. Like, we spoke to one of the guys there at Box, and he was like, you'd have had to have probably 7 fights domestically, probably 5 stoppages, like some highlight reel stuff to even get this opportunity. So for you to be able to say yes and do it healthily, and people go, oh my God, he looks really sharp.
And yeah, I'm putting a great performance.
Do you know what I mean? He was sensational.
It was close.
The DAZN card had him winning the fight.
Yeah.
And one of the refs came into the back and said, listen, he said, we thought you won like the last 4 rounds. It was just that Peter had a little bit more output to start with, which completely understandable considering he took the fight on 5 days' notice. Like, take that fight on a full camp, and personally I think Reese wins that fight, and he's opened his eyes to the world as to who he is, but only because he was been so dialed in all year and put himself in a place where we could do it. Because you're right, it was an amazing performance. Like, he looked so fit and so sharp and so strong on the night. It was kind of like, damn, you'd think this guy had a full camp for this.
Yeah, because it was interesting as well, wasn't it? Because obviously you were preparing for the fight, or he was preparing for the fight in January.
Yes.
And they had, Gavin had a fight in the gym not long before, and I can't remember who the other fighter was. So his sparring was kind of light sparring, which is not fitness orientated at all. It's sort of very technical.
Yeah.
And like I said, to go the full distance in that fight, and at no point, it was little phone box war. It wasn't like a sort of outside boxing. He done really well.
Arguably one of the fights of the night as well. Like they went to war. Do you know what I mean? And Peter had a full camp for that, and Peter will openly say like he fully prepared for that. So for Reece to be able to do that was just testament to him as a fighter. Really, like he's such an interesting character. He's so chilled. Like not once was he phased. Have you met? I assume you've met Reece.
Yeah, we've met him a couple of times. Yeah,
like people always laugh, and like before the Cardiff card on the Lauren Price one, like he's seconds away from walking out, and he's dancing and being an idiot in the back room, and seconds away from walking out at Riyadh, he's just doing some like funny shit in the back room, and I'm like, he's such a chill character. Do you know what I mean? So he was always going to do well.
Yeah, it's brilliant to see. And from your point of view, I suppose, do you find it nice or difficult that when you've done your job's over a day or two before the fight happens, it's completely out of your control? Then you can't do it. Do you like that, or do you find like you almost want to help? Like you cut your job's done.
It's a hard one because like for me, I always say like, as long as you make weight safely with rehydrated and refuel properly, like on fight day you've done everything you need to and you're happy and your stomach's good. Basically by like midday on fight day I'm done. Like it's out of my hands, and once you've had your lunch you're ready to go, and all I can do is sit back and watch. And win or lose, and for the most part it's when they lose, because when they win it's on them, but when they lose I'm kind of like, oh, could I have done more? What could I have done differently? And is there anything that I did wrong that meant that they lost? And realistically, like, you can be as fueled and as prepared as possible and still go in there and get chinned inside 10 seconds. So it's completely out of control then. It's the fight game at that point. I used to get to the point where I get like super nervous, but I've been to so many fights now, I don't necessarily get that anymore. Like, for me, and this is a skill for a lot of practitioners listening, is this comes down to weight cutting, this comes down to fight day as well. If you're going to be there and you're going to help with the weight cut, you're going to be there on fight day, you have to be the epitome of chilled. You have to be almost unnoticeable. Like if they want to come to you and chat to you, sound, but you can't show any level of anxiety, you can't show any level of doubt, but you also can't be that bravado and overconfident. You almost have to be so mellow, because they're coming to you as a soundboard, they're not asking for advice, they're not asking for anything. They just want reassurance, or they just want a normal chat. Do you know what I mean? Like, so you have to understand that, so that your emotions don't portray. You might be the most nervous person in the entire universe waiting for that. Do you know what I mean? Like, but you have to be so chilled. And this is the same in the weight cut as well. I was saying this to a lot of people, is there's a lot of new practitioners coming into the space now who see what we do online and think it's mint, and they go, get these fighters on weight, we do all this bath and this dehydration, then they go in there and you can be part of the team and whatever. But it from the outside it looks as simple as diet them, put them in a bath, and then let them go and punch each other in the face, and it's just not that. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a skill to be able to read somebody's mood when there's a weight cut. Like the weight cutting thing, just a successful weight cut can be like hinged on the tone of a room. Like if you have too many people in that room, the mood may dip and things get really difficult. Or if the music choice is wrong, or if there's music on at all, you have to be able to read the room to know when to change that and turn that off. Like, I've got to the point now where I kind of pride myself on, I can kind of look at somebody and get a vague idea as to where they are mentally. But that's a skill that only comes with time. That comes from, I try and get to as many weight cuts as I can. Like, I think last year I was at like something like 45 weekends away doing weight cuts, so I've got a lot of exposure to how people respond to dehydration, to everything else, and that's definitely a skill that people need to pick up, because if you want to get into this space, it's not just as simple as knowing the science. Because I can put you in a position where we're only doing a 3% dehydration, it should be super easy, but if it's not easy, or things go wrong, or things break, or a sauna doesn't work, or the bath overflows and you can't use it, like, what happens? How do you deal with that? Dictates the weight cut, which then could dictate fight week as well. So whether it's fight day or fight week, you have to be the epitome of chilled. Even you might be wrecked inside. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't like almost the fact that the quality of the weight cut is defined by how confident the fighter is.
Yes.
In the weight cut. You know, if they're in their mind thinking, I'm in great shape, I feel fresh, even if they're not necessarily, they'll feel it in the ring.
100%. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong, I've been in some tremendously difficult weight cuts. I've been in weight cuts where I've gone, I'm not happy with where we are, but you've taken this fight and you're going to do it anyway, so we got to get you here as safe as possible. Like, there's been scenarios, and I'm not proud to say this, but this is kind of how extreme it can get, where people have like collapsed and passed out in the baths, and it's a case of how I deal with this now and how we portray what needs to happen next needs to be so clear and so calm and so concise that they believe that they'll still be in a fine place. Because sometimes it's down to an overly aggressive level of dehydration that we couldn't control because it's been a mad weight cut, or it's been a case of they've overheated and now we need to cool them down and put them in that position. And like I said, these aren't things that people are going to see online because it's not necessarily something we want to put out there, but sometimes these things happen. And how you, I'm not going to say the word rescue, but how you turn that around to put them in a position where they do feel good is as important as getting them there safely. Do you know what I mean? So you're right. The mood of the weight cut can dictate the mood of the week, can dictate the mood of the weekend, and that can then feed into everything else. These guys, and a lot of fighters will say this, is they go into every fight feeling like they could have done more. They go into every fight going, I'm not fit enough, I'm not sharp enough, I could have done 2 more rounds, I could have done this differently, I could have done that. So if the weight cut goes well, which for the most part it really does, it's just a nice tick of the box to go, I've done that, I'm refueled, I'm ready, I'm healthy, now I've just got to go and do what I can do. So it does play a massive role in terms of the psychology of it as well, which not a lot of people will see.
I suppose like every weight cut will be different as well. Like,
yeah.
Even with the same fighter, they could have like a brilliant first weight
100%.
cut, and then the next one is terrible, and like
100%.
Like it's just a constant roller coaster. I suppose.
And a lot of that as well is dictated by how frequently you fight as well. Like, it's good in boxing that you're going to get, you're probably going to get maybe 2 to 3 fights a year. But MMA, some guys do a mad weight cut and then go, oh, listen, I'm fighting again in 4 weeks. And I'm like, you've just seen the weight cut you've put yourself through. What are we doing fighting again in 4 weeks? Do you know what I mean? How are we going to lose another 10, 12 kilos in 4 weeks because you've just spent the last 10 weeks dieting? But you're right, every weight cut is different for every individual and it's all dependent on time. Like last year I went to Thailand, I had a guy fighting in a tournament in Thailand at one of the main stadiums. And the rules of that tournament are that you fight every 4 to 5 weeks. So you're fighting the best Thais in the world at that point. And the people in Thailand don't necessarily cut a ton of weight. So for a guy who's walking quite heavy above the weight category, the first 2 camps he'll say, fine. And then by the time we got to fight 3, fight 4, you can see he gets a little bit more drawn on the scale. The weight starts to slow down between camps. We're dieting on significantly less food. And all of a sudden, the accumulation of those weight cuts does get to you. And it gets to you physically, but it also gets to you psychologically as well. Because before you know it, you've had 4 fights in 6 months and you spent the last 8 months of the year dieting and you go, oh my God, I've had no break. And then this is where you get a lot of kickback from fighters as well, is they've lost so much weight. And you'll see this a lot. Like you'll see in boxing as well, like Ricky Hatton, for example. The guy used to cut an insane amount of weight and then used to balloon back up enormously. And I say this to a lot of fighters, is you've got to see it like an elastic band. The further you pull back on that elastic band, the further it's going to go in the opposite direction. So yeah, you'll make the weight and you'll be completely dialed in and shredded, but give it 2 weeks and you've put back on 12 kilos and you're wondering what on earth's gone on. And some of that is a physical response and some of it's a psychological response, but generally the bigger the weight cut, the bigger side effects you're going to get on the other side of it as well. And then does that inflict on your next camp and your next camp after that? There's a nice bit of research actually, Jon Jones did it, where they followed a fighter over 5 years. I won't say who the fighter is, but they followed him over 5 years. And it was a case of, they documented all of his weight cuts and all of his weight rebounds, and they measured his body fat and they measured his muscle mass at the start and end of every camp. And they found that because his weight cuts were so big and that his rebounds were so big, that he was coming into every single fight camp afterwards heavier but fatter. So he had less muscle mass and he had more fat mass every time he started. Because you've got to think, when you diet, you're going to diet from a place where you initially pull body fat. But the lighter you get, the body's going to start to pull from muscle mass then. So by the end of the camp, you're going to end with less muscle mass than you started for the most part. Might be a kilo, might be a kilo and a half. For some bigger ones, it might be more. And then the body's natural response to a weight cut is to go, we need to get back up to normal weight as fast as possible. So this is where you see a lot of guys start binge eating and start throwing food down like no tomorrow, just from a body's natural response. Now, you can't put on muscle mass quickly. It takes a long time to do so. You can put on fat mass like that. So these guys are shooting back up to weight. They're putting on 10 kilos, and most of that, if not all of that, is fat mass. So they've they start the next camp fatter with less muscle mass, and then if you continue that cycle by 5, 6, 7 fights down the line, you're actually fatter and less of an athlete than you were when you started, and that's only down to doing these massive weight cuts.
Yeah, because I was going to say Paddy Pimblett sort of gets a lot of stick.
Literally the first
yeah.
Because you see it all the time after every... Because he always looks in really good shape.
Yeah.
You see him after the fight and it looks like a different person.
Yeah.
So, like, do you think that I would have... Like, because that's what I thought, like, surely long term, that can't be sustainable.
Yeah, so long...
Does always look good shape though, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Like he
You know, he does, and I know he's nutritionist as well, and his nutritionist is a good guy, but he says... You know what, Paddy's not as bad as he used to be, but his nutritionist used to be like, we do struggle out of camp because he has that tendency just to blow out really big. Now the thing is with Paddy, he fights at what, 70 kilos, I think? He fights at 70 kilos, and I think he blows up to like 84, 85 kilos, which sounds like a lot, but when you look at these MMA guys, it's a pretty normal rebound. And I think the bother with Paddy is, if you ever see him physically, he never really looks too bad in the body, but he just holds it in his face. Like he gets a completely like proper moon face when he blows up. So his actual start weight isn't necessarily horrendous. Like it does look it from the outside if you're not used to weight cutting, but it's not as bad as first depicted. I think Paddy gets a lot of stick, but there's a lot of eyes on Paddy anyway. And I think to start with, it was a bit of a brand that I'm going to get as big as possible. Do you know what I mean? But I know now he's kind of breaking into that top 10. I know he's a little bit less likely to do that now. I know his weight cuts are a little bit more sensible. Do you know what I mean? But I mean, to Paddy's credit, from what I hear, is basically out of camp he used to be a little bit difficult to deal with in terms of you never knew what he was going to do, but the second it was fight camp you would not get somebody more dedicated, and it was a case of he knew the trade-offs of I'm going to get massive, so I have to be dialed in. So there are long-term issues with that though, so it's called that collateral fattening is what it's called, where you just get consistently fatter, and you do get some knock-on effects from like cardiovascular disease and stuff from having this kind of unhealthy bounce back. How that translates to 5-10 years down the line, I don't know, but I think you can see it like in these guys who finished professional boxing, like Hatton for example, or these people, that you do tend to end up a little bit fatter when you're older, whether that's just a natural aging process or I don't know, but even if it's not from a physical standpoint, from a mental standpoint, you do pick up tiny bits of disordered eating from them big weight cuts, because you're so restrictive and it is so weight focused that you're going to get some knock-on effect psychology as well. So even if you are in great shape when you retire, you might have some tendencies that you didn't think of, where you do tend to binge a little bit more, or you can't really control your like emotions around food, which does lead to things down the line. So yeah, the Paddy one's interesting. Paddy, I think, is a little bit more under control now, but he definitely had that brand in there.
I think there was a few edited pictures.
What, you know, I know exactly which one you're going to think of. It was him in America.
Yeah.
There's him in America, and he's just got this massive face. Even like the top of his head looks fat. And then he's wearing this like black t-shirt, and he's just got this massive gut. Like, from people around Paddy, like, he doesn't necessarily get horrendously big. Obviously, to boxing context, it's massive. Like, it's huge, right? It's so big. Like, boxers would be like mortified if they ever got anywhere near that. But for MMA guys, it's not super uncommon. Like I've had people go from 70 kilos to 90 kilos and go, what's going on here then? That's like 20 kilos above fight weight. 20 kilos is an insane amount to be above fight weight, but yeah, it's not uncommon. I think just because Paddy's in the spotlight, he does get a lot of stick for it.
Yeah, it's weird. It's the face is the giveaway.
The face is the giveaway.
Like
the face is his
we
thing,
see fighters sort of out of camp when fights are announced, and you see them on fight night, and it's something odd about it. You're like, you don't look like you in a weird way. Or you see them, you've only ever seen them at a fight.
Yes.
And then you meet them out and about, and you're like, oh, hold on a bit. You look sort of, it's odd that.
Yeah, we've definitely seen some fighters like on weigh-in day, and we've seen them in the morning, and they're like,
different human being.
Don't look as well as you did when we seen you a few weeks ago.
It was a bit grumpier with us when we stick a camera in their face. But, so with the heavyweight stuff, and obviously Tom is a great example because he's done it at the very, very top.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Because I mean, Tom's always in good shape, but he's not skin and bones at any point. He's never chiseled. And how does that differentiate? How do you find the perfect weight for a heavyweight? Because they always do have that sort of little bit of fat, so to speak. Is that a purposeful thing?
So it's a hard one with heavyweight because, like you said, they've got to be under 120 kilos. So as long as they're under 120 kilos, like, you can kind of be whatever you want. And And these guys are big dudes. These guys are really big dudes. But I think, and this isn't me blowing smoke up Tom's ass because he wouldn't want that, but I would argue that Tom and to some extent Cyril Gane at that heavyweight division have kind of redefined what a heavyweight should be. Because if you go back through the archives of UFC, heavyweights used to be these slow, flat-footed guys who gassed out after one round and they would just stand and bang and somebody was going to sleep, so you didn't need 5 rounds of a gas tank because it wasn't going the distance. Do you know what I mean? Like, I love Derrick Lewis. Derrick Lewis is one of my favourite fighters of all time, right? But Derrick Lewis isn't in great shape. Like, even if you look at, like, DC when he went up to heavyweight, or you look at, like, even Jon Jones now, not in great shape. Like, and I do think this new breed of heavyweight coming through, because there's, like, Almeida who's come through, who's in unreal condition. Like, even Stipe, when he was retiring, looked in decent shape. Do you know what I mean? Arguably too light for heavyweight at that point, but redefining what heavyweights are as athletes now is a big thing. And you know what? I go back to boxing for this as well, because I say Tom and Cyril Gane did it. I'd argue probably Anthony Joshua did it, because we'd never seen before Anthony Joshua a heavyweight in that condition. And he used to get so much stick for it. He used to be the bodybuilder, and
yeah, it was,
you know what?
With Tyson.
Arguably, maybe to his downfall to some extent, because carrying that much muscle mass requires so much like aerobic capacity, because it's so much active tissue that you are more likely to gas out. But he was a stand above in terms of what an athlete is. Like, he's an athlete of a bloke, isn't he? But now Tom, I think, has set that standard for what the UFC guys should be, because I've just got his stablemate Mick Parkin. He's just signed up with me for the UFC London card, and the first thing that he said was, I want to try this because I do okay, but I want to see what happens when I do dial things in, when I do carry less body fat. When he said when I weigh in, I want to be in good a shape as Tom. And I'm like, sweet, okay. And it's nice to see that standard is set, because no longer a heavyweight's just these like slobs who just swing with no skill. Like, so kind of what does it look like is a hard one, because I always get this from people, and they go, well, you work with heavyweights, they don't need to diet. And I'm like, no, they don't. They absolutely don't need to diet. But fueling a heavyweight is, they have to eat such a significant amount of food that there's a skill in terms of getting that in terms of like day to day, because all of a sudden, normally you're dieting people on 2,000, 2,500 calories, and you're dieting these guys on close to 4,000 calories. And sometimes the heavyweights have gone to the extent where they don't think they need to make weight, so the quality of diet isn't the best. And if we go back to Tom, for example, when he was on Cage Warriors and when he fought Jake Collier, he used to say that he looked like a fat dad. That was his thing. He was like, I look like a fat dad. And his diet, he'll say himself, was like donuts, cans of Coke and Greggs. And it was like, wow, that's not an athlete diet. Do you know what I mean? And over years and years and years, he's refined it. So if you look at him fighting Jake Collier to now, that's not an overnight transformation. That's years and years of dedication to his craft and his nutrition and his strength and conditioning as well, because that wasn't something that he believed in either. So he's adopted all of these to put himself in a place where muscle mass is peak, and he is an athlete now. And these heavyweights are starting to come into play. So it's not a case of they need to diet. But what I say to these heavyweights is, does that extra fat mass serve you in any way as an athlete? I always call fat mass in an athletic context unfunctional mass, because it's just there. Like, it doesn't make you faster, it doesn't make you more robust, it doesn't mean you've got more longevity. What's it there for, really? And if we can strip that fat mass back a little, we can push lean mass up more. We make you pound for pound a more athletic individual. Eventually, over time, you reduce that fat mass and replace it with muscle mass, and that's a years process, years and years of process. But if you adopt the habits of that now, 2-3 years down the line, you're a completely different specimen of an athlete. Like Mick, for example, he walks slightly above the 120 division. We've decided, listen, whilst intensity of camp isn't at its highest, we're going to take off as much of that fat mass as we can, and then we're going to just pump him full of food for like the last 5 or 6 weeks of camp to make sure that he can meet training demand. Because like I said, these guys are doing 2 sessions a day. They're doing big rounds with big blokes. They expend a lot of energy. So we've got to balance it really finely in terms of, you don't need to lose weight, but if you want to be in that place where you want to be the best athlete possible, we have to take off some of this fat mass. So managing that when they're not used to that dieting phase as well is another argument of that psychology thing, where we have to convince them that this is the best thing for them longer term rather than in the short term. And as long as they feel fueled and recovered and not hungry, Because a heavyweight realistically is never going to feel hungry. They're always full.
Yeah.
Like, that's another thing that they've got to contend with is, do they ever get the feeling of hunger because they can just eat what they want when they want? And it's not a case of that we've pulled loads of stuff out of mixed diet, for example. It's a case of we've refined everything to a complete whole food base. It's super, super high protein, is on way more feeds than normal. And now it's a case of, let's see how you respond to being with less fat mass. Do you move a bit quicker? Are you able to recover better? Like, is your gas tank a bit better? Because all of a sudden you're carrying like nearly a stone lighter, for example. And then it gives us room longer term that's your new walking weight, and we can put you in a position camp to camp to camp to camp where you do become this more lean, refined, athletic individual. Because there's some of these heavyweights are cutting from like 135 kilos. Some of them are cutting 15 kilos, but the guys who are cutting 15 kilos aren't necessarily shredded at 135, like 130. Do you know what I mean? Where, like Tom, for example, never cuts weight. Tom always sits below that 120. So for him, it's a case of, how do you fuel camp to the best of your ability? Are we getting proper nutritious whole foods in most of the time to keep you in the position you are now? Because he does a lot of strength and conditioning. And again, that's something that Mick started doing, is he's doing a lot of strength and conditioning. So you have to be in a position to grow muscle as well. So fueling an athlete, not just for body recomposition, but for muscle growth as a heavyweight, brings around... It's a different fight camp, for example. Like, for a boxer or another MMA fighter, we're clinging on to hope that you ain't losing muscle because your diet's going to be super aggressive on the downside. But for a heavyweight, you get a best of both worlds, and it's kind of blending it to go, you don't need to diet, but we need to optimize everything you're doing now for the goals that you want. So it's different to what a normal guy would be, but it's still as intensive in terms of how detailed they've got to be with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That I thought what we could do for sort of the last sort of 10, 15 minutes or so is maybe talk about some stuff that will translate a little bit more to kind of everyday life for listeners, people who are, you know, whether they're just gym goers or, you know, they box or whatever to any capacity.
Absolutely.
And I thought the first one for me is, I have to ask, because every boxer I know, straight after weigh-in, straight to Nandos.
Yeah.
Is Nandos this kind of great thing where it's this fusion between lovely but quite healthy? You know, should I be caning Nandos after the gym? Is that the way forward?
You know what? I'm not a massive fan of it. In my head, I'm like, if you cook your own food, you know you're minimising any risk of food poisoning. You know exactly what's got into it. We're going to have no stomach issues. But when you're travelling away, sometimes that is the only option, right? Now, for me, Nandos is the best of a proverbial bad bunch. And this isn't me saying Nandos is bad, because realistically at its baseline, it's lean proteins, it's carbs, and it's like, I don't know, maybe a little bit of halloumi or something on the side. The bother is that these fighters have been in fight camp for so long, and they've restricted themselves and maybe not had these joys of Nandos and stuff out, which arguably you can have in camp. I try and make sure my guys can have at least one meal out a week. But my concern with Nandos is, I've seen people go to Nandos and absolutely devour everything on the menu and then go, my stomach is in bits. And I'm like, what did we expect? So if I'm more than happy with Nandos, and I go to Nandos with a lot of my fighters afterwards, but keeping people on a leash when you go to Nandos is ideal. So if you're going to go to Nandos after a fight, you want to be getting mashed potatoes, you want to be getting rices. Try and avoid burgers and wraps because they're so fatty. Get some lean chicken and maybe like a small side. And don't get me wrong, you ain't going to be stuffed. It's not going to be the normal Nandos you have outside of camp. But if you are going to go there, best of a bad bunch for sure. Just be sensible. Have a look at the fat content, have a look at the calorie content, and like, you're just running the risk of trying to not poo yourself. So it's got to be as simple and as basic and as lean as possible. So Nandos is alright. Nandos is decent. If you have to, go do it, but keep it basic.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only thing I always think is, I like my spice. I get a nice spicy Nandos. Surely same day weigh-ins, you're not having extra hot
now, see if
in the ring.
Now, see, same day weigh-ins, I'm going to be like, you have to prepare your own stuff, because I ain't risking a Nandos on same day weigh-in.
They all do it.
They all do it. They all do it, and eventually they do it too much, and then they go, oh my god, I got hit with a body shot and I nearly shit myself. And then they go, I probably won't do Nandos next time.
Yeah.
So if it's same day weigh-in, prepare your own stuff. It's one day, and then once you've won your fight, go smash as many Nandos as you want. At that point, I'm not bothered. Day before weigh-in, you can get with it a little bit better. But for me, the bottom line of it is this, right? Is you have prepared 8 to 10 weeks meticulously for this fight. if you having a Nandos risks your ability to perform when you've already done the hardest bit, which is making the weight, why risk it on a Nandos when you can just have one the day later? Like, if you go to Nandos and you're going to poo yourself in the ring, you've just ruined your fight camp just because of that one meal. So you got to be as sensible as possible. Same day weigh-in, don't do it. Day before weigh-in, you can get away with it, but you still got to be sensible.
And the other thing, I saw this on your socials a while back now. You're talking about water and how much water you can intake. And I'm rubbish for it. I'm the kind of person, like 4 cups of tea is about as much water as I get in a day.
Yeah.
Like that whole, I think it's, what is it, a litre an hour or a litre every 2 hours or something I saw?
Is this for
just how much,
rehydration or day-to-day?
Rehydration, how much your body can sort of take in of water.
Okay, so again, that's something that a lot of people do struggle with, is that they've spent all this time dehydrating and then they're just really, really thirsty. And people's go-to is just chug as much as possible, and unfortunately once you do that, the body just kicks it straight back out, either through the mouth or the other end. So that's half the battle, is just making sure that you can do things as sensibly as possible. So really, my thing for most people is, if you can probably get away with about 1.5 litres of fluid in that first hour, but you still want to stagger it. So one of the things with water, right, is if you neck too much too soon, it kind of bypasses the mechanisms of being absorbed and just hits the stomach. And if it does that, it's only coming straight back out. So you have to take it in relatively slowly. 1.5 litres across an hour in the first hour, and then 1 litre an hour is probably ideal. And you've still got to take on that maybe 500 mils every 30 minutes. And in that instance, I can be pretty positive that your stomach's going to be in a good place. Because not only have you dehydrated, but you've probably cut out food as well. So all of a sudden, you put 1.5 litres of, let's imagine the Nandos, right? You weigh in, you smash 2 litres of fluid straight away, and then you go and hit Nandos right away. The mess in your stomach there is so much fluid, so much food at once, the body just goes, what do you want me to do with this? And it's just going to kick it out. So you have to be sensible and stagger it, and this is the issue most fighters have. Do 1.5 litres or 1 litre in that first hour, and then give yourself no more than 1 litre per hour. And it'll take you a little bit of time to get rid of that thirst response, but you'll hold water better. You're not going to be sick. It's not going to come out the back end. And that way as well, you don't get bloated, because your stomach's not full of water. It means you can take on more food. And if you can take on more food, we can carbohydrate load a lot better. If you limit yourself by smashing 2, 3, 4 litres in the first 2 hours, you're going to really struggle to get food on board. And then we're already behind. And then you start cramming food in again. And then all of a sudden, it's a concoction for you having a really bad stomach because you've messed up the first 2 hours. So, rule of thumb, litre an hour, 500 mils every 30 minutes. And do that for as many litres as you need to rehydrate. And your stomach will thank you for it 100%.
Fair enough. You got any questions, Bud? I know you've been trying to make flyweight recently. Is there anything
I'm far off that now, I think, especially after Christmas. But I suppose it's a massive difference on it when you see these professional athletes compared to everyday people who are just going to the gym a few times a week.
You know what? It is. I think the diet. The thing is, I think what the professional athletes can do is they can set a standard, and especially in a boxing gym or in a Muay Thai gym or an MMA gym, if the top guys are doing it correct, then it generally feeds down into the gym. So you can kind of create a positive culture within the gym or within a fitness space if somebody you admire is doing it properly. Now the issue is trying to find that person is quite difficult, because even some of the best athletes in the world aren't doing it properly. But the advice for those people is, like you said, completely different depending on the person to person. But what I would always say from a diet perspective is, I have a lot of people go, shall I try carnivore, shall I try keto, shall I try this? And I'm like, if it feels extreme, it's probably not sustainable. If you can do something that you can do every single day, and you can give yourself a little bit of leeway to enjoy something, because we're all human and fighters are humans as well. The people think they're like robots who just train and just eat clean all the time, and it's a case of, if you can do the correct things 80% of the time and you can blend in 20% of something that makes you feel good, you're more likely to do that than you are cutting out complete massive avenues of your diet. So if you can do that, you'll be more successful than doing these mad things. Like at the moment, I get a lot of people asking me, should they fast in fight week? That's a thing amongst boxers at the moment, and MMA guys, shall I just fast in fight week and I'll be fine? But my argument is if you're going to start fasting in fight week, you're going to build up so much fatigue that by the time that you do start to refuel, you've got 5 days where you've not eaten. So you might make weight, but the fatigue you've built up and accumulated just kind of feeds into the rest of it then. And if you are thinking of fasting in fight week, please don't. Just eat sensibly. There's no need. You're not going to get any extra benefit from it. It needs to just be sensible. And that's the main thing. Be sensible most of the time. And it's not sexy. It doesn't sell. But it kind of works.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate all of that. That was unbelievably fascinating. I'm sure for anyone listening
that
as
was
well.
a really good episode.
Like, just to... There's so many like myths and lies and everything around it. You sort of see... You don't really know what goes on behind those curtains before they walk out. And it's been
so
great
much.
to hear that.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully, we can just make boxing and MMA weight cuts a bit more sensible. Like, that's the goal anyway.
Yeah, I think
I was going to ask as well, just the final question.
Yes.
Do you reckon you'll get Tom Aspinall against Jon Jones?
Of course, you had to get that one in.
Do you want my honest opinion? I don't think it's going to happen.
No.
My understanding at the moment is Dana said it's going to happen. Not really heard from John, but you got to put it in this, and we'll end on this. If you're Jon Jones, you've solidified yourself by beating the heavyweight GOAT. You've just beaten him at MSG. He's retired. You've ended your career on a high. You've probably made 12 to 15 million from that fight. You're like 38. Why not ride out on the sunset? Stipe tagged Jon Jones a lot of times. Stipe's 43. Whatever he is, 44. If Stipe's touching you, you can believe Tom's going to touch you. And it only takes one or two from Tom. And you've got to think, do you go out with the idea of Jon Jones might have got beat by Tom Aspinall? Or do you go out with the idea of Jon Jones got absolutely sparked by Tom Aspinall in his last fight? And from a business perspective, John's a smart man. And I just don't think Jon Jones takes that fight. And I'd absolutely love to be wrong. But honestly, and I know I'm completely biased here, but I think if Tom Aspinall and Jon Jones happens, I think Tom puts him away inside one. And I don't know what that does for Jon Jones' legacy then.
Wow. It's a big claim. If there's any hate comments, find Sean on social media, drop him a follow, and then leave him on the comments of
and
his
if
videos.
the fight happens,
Yeah.
money on round one.
Yeah, put your money where your mouth is. We appreciate, obviously, everyone for listening. Like I said, follow Sean on social media. There's loads of great stuff. Even if you're not a fighter, you're not going to the gym. It's just some really interesting stuff. It's fascinating. So check all of that stuff out. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you all later in the week.
Punches chance. Punches Chance Podcast.